Good afternoon, everyone. Before we broke for lunch, we were, Mr. Warden was here for cross-examination. Remind me, who's next to cross-examine Mr. Warden? Mr. Friedman. Mr. Friedman, I believe you have an exhibit for us.
I do. During the break, I passed out what has been preliminarily marked as Turn Cross-Examination Exhibit number 3. And this exhibit is a transcript from the Edison.com website. The date is not on here, but it would be dated April 30th, 2013. Prepared remarks of Ted Craver, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Edison International, from the first quarter 2013 financial teleconference.
All right, and let's note that is marked as Exhibit 3, Turn 3.
Yes. Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Warden.
Good afternoon.
I've passed out this transcript from Mr. Craver's remarks. I'm really interested in just one particular paragraph from the document, and I'd like you to turn to page 2.
Okay.
The fourth paragraph, where Mr. Craver mentions the insurance policy claims filed at the end of 2012. Now, you're the correct witness to ask about NEIL insurance policy claims, are you not?
Yes.
According to Mr. Craver's statement, as of December 29, 2012, SCE had filed claims under the outage policy of $234 million, of which our, meaning Edison's, share would be approximately $183 million. Is that consistent with your understanding?
Yes. With one clarification.
Please.
This is for the outage accident insurance, known in shorthand as replacement power. We have not yet filed a claim for property damage.
So this amount was solely intended to recover replacement power costs incurred during 2012?
Yes, and with one amplification. Under the policy, there is a very prescriptive methodology for calculating the claim, and it is not identical to the calculations we are making for purposes of this docket.
And in the next sentence, Mr. Craver states that these outage claims represent the maximum available recovery applicable for claims, for that claims period under the policy. Does that mean that Edison actually calculated a larger number, but that what was submitted was the maximum available?
Yes, there is a weekly cap on what the policy will cover. And in most weeks, under the formula prescribed by the policy, we would have exceeded the amount of replacement power expense that the policy covers.
And does this policy, the NEIL policy, provide any coverage for what have been characterized in this phase as incremental steam generator replacement, repair and inspection costs?
Not this specific policy as represented by the $234 million.
Is there another NEIL policy that might be relevant for purposes of those costs?
Potentially the property damage policy would be, but we have not yet made a claim there.
And is there a reason that Edison did not make such a claim in 2012?
Your Honor, I would direct the witness to communications that he may have been involved in on that subject.
Noted.
I don't know the timing, but I know that it's under review.
And are the two policies you mentioned, the replacement power policy and the property policy, are those the only two NEIL forms of coverage that are relevant to the situation, to the cost at San Onofre?
Yes.
Are there any other policies with NEIL?
Not that I'm aware of.
And I assume because SCE filed on December 29th in 2012, there was no action by NEIL on those claims in 2012.
Correct.
And to the extent that Edison does receive any money from NEIL, is it Edison's intention to credit that money to ratepayers or to do something else with the money?
We would use it, we would expect to be able to recover our replacement power as we have calculated it as directed in this docket. To the extent we recover that and subsequently receive payment from NEIL, we would propose to convey that to benefit the ratepayer, to defray what the ratepayer had paid.
I'd like to turn to the appendix to, it's actually an errata to SCE 3. I'm not sure if it was you or Mr. Perez that's sponsoring this, because both of your names are listed. It's titled Errata to Exhibit SCE 03, Appendix 1, Question 23, and it's corrected songs to generation figures.
Let's go off the record for a moment.
Are you talking about C11?
Is that 11?
And Mr. Friedman, would you identify where we are again?
Sure, I apologize. We are in what has been marked as Exhibit SCE 11 in Attachment B. The title of the tables are Songs Net Generation, and it shows net generation in January and February and March of 2012.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Go ahead.
Mr. Warden, are you familiar with these tables?
I recollect them going out. I did not author them. Mr. Perez did. But
perhaps you can help me. I have a very simple question. It really doesn't go to the source of the numbers. It goes to how they're treated. My question is, the numbers in some cases show positive generation and in other cases show negative generation. Is it correct to conclude that when there is a negative number, that shows net consumption of electricity at the unit for that particular period of time?
I'm not aware. I don't know, Mr. Friedman. I'm sorry. Mr. Perez will be here shortly.
Okay, so I could clarify this. My question really goes to the extent that there is net power consumption associated with these numbers, how that's treated for purposes of cost recording.
That I can answer.
So that's my question.
Yes. I want to get the precise term of art here. The auxiliary load at the site continues, and the ISO bills Southern California Edison for that. It is characterized as a negative, uninstructed deviation. And Southern California Edison receives a bill for that. We record that expense in the SONGS monthly report, in the SONGS outage memorandum account, in the line item that is identified as Huntington Beach with some explanatory footnotes. So, for the record, on line 39 of the monthly report that is served to parties under my signature, The charges from the ISO are recorded there.
Which line was that again, I'm sorry?
That is line 39. And footnote 4 explains that what is labeled Huntington Beach actually collects other charges.
And would it be possible in a future revision of this exhibit to break out the costs associated with uninstructed deviations at songs 2 and 3?
We would be happy to do so if that would be helpful to the parties.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to just spend a couple of minutes with you going through the comparison of authorized and recorded expenditures. There is a comparison exhibit that was prepared but not marked, the one on legal size paper.
Okay.
I'm referring to that, although I'm not asking that it be marked. Yeah. Do you have that in front of you, Mr. Warden? Yeah.
Yes, I do.
And this is an attempt to reconcile the various presentations of data from SCE4, the songs outage memorandum account, and SCE10, is that right?
Yes, and I would observe that these are amounts.
Right. Just a moment.
Off the record.
I think I'd like to ask you more specifically about the authorized amounts. I believe I understand how these numbers on the recorded side are reconciled. I would ask one question on the recorded numbers. In the notes section on SCE 10, there is a reference to an exclusion of IT costs, and that's $9 million, right?
That would be the O&M on the far right.
Yes.
Right, that's in the O&M row. The capital being the first part up there, going left to right under SCE 10, pages 6 to 11, the reference, capital projects, 168 million. And then the subtotals in SCE 10 that add up to 167,608,000. That's the capital.
Okay, so I was asking about the IT cost.
The IT is the row below, which is in the O&M section.
And I believe that in SCE 4 there is a reference to an authorized revenue requirement for IT expenses that's 10.3 million and recorded expenses of 9 million. Is that right?
Yes.
So when we move to the authorized O&M revenue requirements, do those IT costs show up in the authorized requirements as well?
I would have to go to SCE 4. Bear with me a minute.
Off the record.
Can you restate your question again? I have the location now.
Yeah, my question is, where the $10.3 million in authorized IT costs shows up does it show up in the authorized base O&M revenue requirement?
Yes, in footnote 6, it indicates that part of what the commission authorized in the 2012 rate case, embedded in that O&M authorization, was $10.3 million of IT expense.
So that would show up in figure 3-1 on the next page of SCE 4?
Yes.
That would be part of the $389 million?
Yes.
Okay. Keeping that $389 million in mind, if you could open Exhibit SCE 10. And do you have page 3 there? That's the fold-out table.
The reference is actually page 2, but I think it all ties out at the same.
I have a 3 on the bottom right corner of this.
Yes. I'm sorry. I was talking to the reference on here, on the work paper, but I think they're the same. So,
well, this is what I want to understand. When I go to the bottom right-hand corner of page 3, I see a total authorized O&M revenue requirement of $396 million. And when I'm looking at page 13 of SCE 4, the table we were just on, it says 389. So there's about a $7 million difference, and I'm not sure how to reconcile those two numbers. Can you help me to do that?
page 3 of SCE 10 does not have the credit for corporate support. So there's more than one difference. As you recall from Mr. Perez's testimony, corporate support, that category represents the allocation of some O&M expense to other dockets. For example, the steam generator replacement capitalization. I think there's a small amount to decommissioning. And it's really to ensure we don't double recover. But the table on page 3 has not yet had that debit or reduction occur. So the total base recorded is $358,602. Do you see that line at the bottom right corner?
Yes.
So if you were to subtract $20,463,000 for corporate support, that would leave a balance of $338,139. And it excludes severance. So another variable is that page 3 excludes severance. But the 364 on page 13 has severance in it. So this is, page 3 of SCE 10 is recorded. Page 13, table figure 3-1 for recorded O&M is 364.
Okay, so you moved to recorded costs. I was actually asking you about authorized, but let's stick on recorded for a moment, because if we were to compare then that $338 million number, which is net of corporate support credits, with the $364 million number, that leaves us with a delta of about $26 million, correct?
Yes.
And is that $26 million the product of severance costs and IT?
Yes.
Okay, I'm with you there. But now I want to move back to authorized, because that's where I don't see the numbers connecting. I see on page 3, we've got the $396 million in authorized revenues. I understand that that does not include corporate support credits. The number with corporate support credits is about $378 million. And the number in figure 3-1 in exhibit SCE4 is $389 million. Is there a way to clarify whether there's a difference between these numbers or missing categories or what?
Could you repeat the question? I think I see an error. This is recorded on page 3 of SCE 10. I see the label to the left of 396118 is said total authorized. And I think that may be part of what's the confusion.
Your Honor, I don't intend to chew up more hearing time on this, but I think what I'd like to do is to see that to the extent that I'm confused, I imagine others may also be confused, and whether this confusion could be cleared up in the exhibit that was discussed previously. That would provide an explanation as to the differences between what's in the record and maybe a new exhibit that would be the final definitive showing. Is that possible?
We will reconcile it. Part of the problem is that the exhibits were prepared at different points in time with varying assumptions, and so there are differences along the way. But I appreciate your confusion, and it's warranted, and we'll get it right.
Okay.
I have one follow-up question on that. So, do you know in this, whether in the GRC we learned that while the decision may authorize a certain amount of, for example, O&M by business group, that Edison takes the universe of O&M and reallocates and rebudgets a bit after the GRC revenue requirement is adopted. Is that right?
Yes, Your Honor.
So my question is, when it says authorized, which we would view as preliminarily allowed, do you know whether that's referring to the original amount that was preliminarily authorized and allocated to the song's O&M, or is this referring to the reconfigured managerial adjustments that were made following the GRC?
It's the first instance, Your Honor. We view authorized as authorized by the Commission.
Okay.
With one complication, which is we were spending in calendar year 2012 in the absence of a final decision with preliminary authorized revenue requirement. And so the recorded is likely not always to match, especially in that year.
Right, but I'm just trying to figure out which authorized quotes you were referring to, and that would be the Commission decision.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you.
Could I just interject, Your Honor? There was questioning about SCE 10, which is Mr. Perez. Mr. Perez will be back. I think, Mr. Friedman, you might consider posing these questions to Mr. Perez. He might be able to clear up this confusion.
Okay, my line of questioning really goes more to the next exhibit that I understand Mr. Warden will be preparing, rather than trying to unpack everything here.
Okay.
I would add one more request, which is, it's my understanding, Mr. Warden, that in decision 1211-051, Edison's general rate case decision, the amount that was authorized on an interim basis was $345.9 million for O&M at 100% share for songs. And I'm not at all clear how that number matches any of the other numbers here.
That would have been in 2009 dollars.
Okay. If it would be possible in the exhibit to also show the escalator applied to that to get to the number, I think that will clear up any lingering confusion about perceived discrepancies. That's okay. I would also ask a question about the updated exhibit, which is it possible for Edison to provide the update in the same format that the outage memorandum account is presented in the monthly reports, with that level of breakdown on recorded costs as you reallocate costs between buckets?
I don't know yet. Mr. Perez may be able to shed some light on it because he is working on that.
Then I will ask Mr. Perez. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Friedman, do you have further cross?
I'm checking.
Okay.
One moment.
Off the record while Mr. Friedman does that. Go ahead, Mr. Friedman.
Mr. Warden, when I was cross-examining Mr. Perez, I had asked him whether Edison intends to seek recovery from ratepayers of the $130 million of incremental steam generator inspection and repair costs, and he deferred that question to you. So I would ask to you whether or not Edison intends to seek recovery of those costs.
Yes.
And would that be in this proceeding or in another proceeding?
Here.
Okay. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
All right, thank you. All right, who is next to cross-examine this witness? All right, Ms. Vinskus.
Hello.
Are you familiar with exhibits SCE 15 and SCE 17?
Not by their number.
Okay,
Let's go off the record and get them from Mr.
All right, off the record.
Mr. Warden, these are MHI letters to SCE stating the MHI and SCE must mutually agree on a repair and or replacement plan for Songs Unit 2 and Unit 3 steam generators. Do you agree?
Well, I've not read these letters.
Okay, well then I'll turn your attention to the specific sentences in each one of those exhibits. So on SCE 15, I'm looking at the last page. Last paragraph, second line down, second sentence in that line, or first, well, I'll just read it to you. Look at the second line on the last paragraph. Do you see that last paragraph? Are you there?
Yes.
Okay. It says, moreover, under the purchase order, any warranty, repair, or replacement must be mutually agreeable. As far as your understanding is concerned, is that do you agree with that statement?
Objection, Your Honor. This lacks foundation, and it's outside the scope of his testimony.
I think that there was testimony that there has been funds recovered under the warranty. Was there not?
Yes.
And
We have received one payment under the warranty, which has been contested by MHI.
Right, it was received in 2012.
Yes.
Correct? And there was extensive testimony on this subject earlier about whether it was a requirement of the warranty or whether it was a desirable outcome.
Right.
So,
Right, but this is about agreement with respect to the long-term repair plan, which is not within the scope of Mr. Worden's testimony.
Yeah. Ms. Venskis, where are you going with this?
Where am I going with this? Well, I'm trying to understand if it was actually if the 70% restart plan was mutually agreeable to the two parties, because if it's not, then that suggests that SCE can't recover for that 70% restart plan. And we had earlier testimony that somebody thought that perhaps that mutually agreeable was in writing, and I've never gotten a firm answer on that, and I think it's directly relevant to 2012 costs. This restart plan was developed in 2012.
First of all, that misstates what this document is about. This document has nothing to do with the 70% restart.
All right, Ms. Venskis, can you maybe try this again and lay the foundation to get where you're going?
Okay. Mr. Warden, is it your understanding that SCE developed a 70% restart plan for Unit 2 sometime in 2012?
Yes.
Okay. Is it your understanding that MHI agreed with that 70% restart plan of Unit 2?
I don't know.
Okay. Is it your understanding that, well, let me strike that. Has anyone told you at any time, besides you, and I don't want any testimony on your conversations with SCE's attorneys, has anyone told you at any time, again, besides counsel, whether or not the warranty, or let me just say the contract with between MHI and SCE with respect to the replacement steam generators requires the mutual agreement between SCE and MHI on a repair or replacement in the event those replacement steam generators break down?
Objection, Your Honor. First of all, outside the scope of this witness's testimony. Second of all, compound question. And third of all, lacks foundation.
All right. So, Ms. Venskis, I think what this witness is here to testify on is the sort of the actions at songs and kind of the corporate level discussions between SCE and MHI may be somewhat beyond that. Is that where Mr. Weissman is going?
Yes.
So can we tie this back to the operations at the Songs facility that's in scope of this witness's testimony?
My question was whether anyone's ever told him. If nobody's ever told him, then nobody's ever told him. If somebody has told him, then I want him to tell me whether or not somebody's told him about whether or not whether or not the contract requires a mutual agreement as to the implementation of a repair or restart plan. It's not outside the scope. It's a simple question of whether or not somebody's ever told him. And I've already gone over why this particular line of questioning is relevant. Maybe it's outside the scope of his testimony, but I don't know that until he tells me whether or not somebody's told him or not.
Okay. I'm going to reiterate my objection, and particularly with respect to the fact that it is a compound question. She merged together repair and restart, which are two different concepts.
Okay. Yeah, so Ms. Venskis, let's start with that and see if we can break this into pieces.
So I have to repeat that long question. Okay.
I can phrase one that might help.
I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
You can go back. See if this gets an objection.
I doubt it.
I wouldn't dare.
Mr. Worden, in 2012, there's been prior testimony that Edison has incurred expenses related to a restart plan for Unit 2. Is that your recollection?
Correct.
Do you know, as to those 2012 costs, whether Edison is seeking to recover them or will be seeking to recover them from MHI under the warranty provisions or purchase order?
That I don't know. We have submitted claims beyond the $45 million up to, I believe, $122 million. I don't know what's in that itemization, Your Honor.
And so to the extent that Edison seeks to recover from MHI 2012 restart-related costs, do you know or do you have an opinion or an understanding as to whether a precondition of recovery would be mutual agreement as to the restart plan's elements?
I do not know that.
Okay. Does that move us along?
Yes, thank you. Quite quickly, actually. Can we go to SCE 7, please?
I'm there.
Okay, and I'd like to direct you to page 4, line 10.
I'm there.
This is your testimony, I believe, through page 4, correct?
Yes.
4, okay.
I just have one moment, please. I'm sorry.
All right, off the record.
And I'll quote, SCE has shown that all of its recorded 2012 songs expenditures were reasonable in light of the facts known at the time those actions were taken. My question is, in your professional opinion, what is your definition of reasonable as used in this testimony?
That it was sound business judgment and the investments were necessary to preserve songs in a circumstance where it could return to service and/or to comply with regulatory requirements.
Okay. And then going to page 5, line 11, it's a similar statement, and I just want to make sure that I understand how you're using the term reasonably. And I'll quote, based upon the facts known at the time the actions were taken, SCE acted reasonably in inspecting and repairing the song's units preparatory to returning them to service. So is your definition of reasonably here used in the testimony that I just read the same definition as the definition that you gave to the prior quote?
Yes, that the expenses incurred were necessary and conducted safely and essential in repairing the units and preparing them to return to service.
Okay, and do you know what repairs were made to Unit 3 in 2012?
I don't recall them exactly. I believe in SCE 10 you probably can find the line items.
Okay, and is SCE 10 sponsored by you, or any part of SCE 10 sponsored by you?
It's sponsored by Mr. Perez.
Okay.
I was involved in its preparation, and one of the attributes it has is a detailed line item of the O&M expenses associated with inspecting and and testing and preparing the units to return to service.
Okay, so I'll be able to identify in SCE 10 which of those expenditures are related to the repairs made to Unit 3 in 2012?
Some of them, they may not all be labeled by unit. Keep in mind also there are common pieces of equipment that are shared by both units that will not be specifically for one unit or the other.
Okay, and I'll ask you about that in a little bit. So, and you may not be able to answer this question now that I just got the answer to my last question, but in what way were these Unit 3 repairs, quote, preparatory to returning them to service?
I don't recall exactly.
Okay. Can we go on to SCE 25, please? This is the January 30th, 2013 Unit 3 Long-Term Preservation Plan, REV.8. I assume that means revision 8?
Yes.
Okay. Are you there?
Yes.
To what individuals or entities was this preservation plan presentation presented, if you know?
I don't know. And there may have been multiple audiences.
That was going to be my next question. Thank you. When was...
I'm sorry, one clarifying thing.
Sure.
Operations and maintenance is usually identified as expenses because they are usually the labor expense of employees that record to the general ledger. Expenditures generally represents an outlay of funds. And I think it's important to keep those distinctions in mind because they have significant differences in the cost recovery.
Okay, thank you. And so if I'm using the terms incorrectly, if you could just correct the record. I'm not a financial person in the least bit, so
Council, we
bear
all
with
do
me.
it. We all do it.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. So back to my questioning as to SCE 25. Do you know when was the first version of this Unit 3 long-term preservation plan drafted?
No.
Okay. Do you know who would know?
I don't.
Do you have any sense or an estimate of time as to when the first version of this preservation plan was drafted?
I don't.
So you don't know if it was in the summer or if it could have been in the spring? You have no knowledge?
Correct.
Okay.
I might observe, Council, that I was not recruited for my current job until late in the year in 2012. So I had my previous job until the third quarter of 2012.
Oh, okay. I understand then. And in your professional opinion, how does SCE define the term, quote, preservation as used in the context here, if you know?
That's an engineering term. I don't know.
Okay. Okay, moving to SCE 7, I believe it is, or maybe it's SCE 9. Hold on one second. I'm sorry. Can we go off the record?
Off the record.